Hi, welcome to Little Big Moments. I'm Jennifer Kagan, your host. I have real conversations with practitioners from all disciplines to explore the question, what is practice? Is it important? And how does it make our lives better? Hi, everybody. I'm here with my very good friend, Jaya, from Bangalore, India. And I'm so happy that you're here to talk to us about practice and about yoga. And welcome. I'd like you to start with a little introduction. Tell us where you are and who you are. And yes, let's start with that.
Yeah, very loaded questions, Jen. I don't know how to answer that.
Who are you? We can just start with name, and where you live. We can start very simply.
Okay. My name is, as you have said, my name is Jaya. It's pronounced in a couple of ways. Let's keep it simple for now. And I have lived in various parts of my own country, which is India, which is actually like many countries within itself. And I've spent a part of my life in the West, in America, in New York. I did not meet you there, but I think that's where we set up the connection of how we subsequently met.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, I don't feel like I belong to a particular region of the country or of the world. And yeah, I feel pretty much like I belong to wherever I am, and I would be happy to settle down at the end of my life anywhere pretty much. So I have sorry.
And you're currently in Bangalore, where you have a yoga studio?
Yes, this is, I think, the largest chunk of my life that I have spent anywhere no, I grew up in Delhi, so that was close to 19 years. But yes, after that, we've been here now for about 7 years or so. Yeah. Yes.
And the studio that you currently run is called The Practice Room, and it's in Bangalore, India.
Yes,
correct?
yes, it is in Bangalore. We have been running this place since it has actually taken a form maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. The first couple of years, it was just very small group of people. But yes, this is what I have been doing since the last 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it actually grow pretty quickly, and you've created quite a community, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But I wanted to start with the way I start with everybody, and because this podcast is about what is practice and what does it mean to you. So that's my first question. What does practice mean to you, and what does it mean? And then what is your practice?
Okay. I think what Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras, I'm not trying to force fit a sutra here in what I am trying to say, but I think it's just the best way to describe probably what my practice has come to mean to me is in the sutra where he says tato dvandva anabhigataha. It means which means it's something that goes beyond the dualities. And it's also something that Mr. Iyengar wrote, I think it was in Light on Life, and I don't remember his words, they are very beautiful, but he said something like our yoga is a way of rediscovering ourselves, where you're not constantly struggling to fit the various broken pieces together. And I think those broken pieces are the dualities that Patanjali talks about, and they are the upadhis or the delimitations that Prashant ji talks about, because I think that is the state which we why we all of us who say that we are some kind of practitioners, why we return to it again and again, is that sense of being able to escape those dualities of being, rich, poor, man, woman. In the case of practice that requires skill, also the very important duality of saying I am good at this or I am bad at this, because if it is a practice, I think it does not matter. It's much like going to sleep, where people are not really good at sleep or bad at sleep, but everybody goes to sleep, and then there's complete equality, and there is a similar state. So I think a practice is very much like that, except that it is done in a conscious state. One is not unconscious, or rather asleep. So that is what I think my practice is to me.
When you talk about the dualities, can you speak specifically, like in your life, what are some of those dualities? We hear that word often, and I'm just curious specifically and personally, maybe where those dualities cause you pain or suffering, and how your practice resolves that.
I think this constant, as throughout our entire waking hours, this constant stress and strain that we feel in our mind of having to decide one way or another, and assessing ourselves or assessing other people one way or another, and then deciding whether we are good at something, how good we are. So all of these which questions are the answers to which for us are either in a yes or no, or this way or that way. I think those are the dualities. I don't think it is something, it's not an abstract concept at all. It's very real. It's something that we live in moment to moment. So even as I'm talking to you, I'm trying to choose my words, and I'm evaluating one word against another word, and that is a duality.
And what is your practice? What constitutes your practice right now?
My practice right now is the practice of yoga, and I think I'm just about trying to make a transition from it just being an asana practice to it being a little, it's the base still is an asana practice, but I'm trying to make a transition beyond that, where the other limbs of yoga are also, they start surfacing. And it is it's much like so when I say that in a state of practice, one has an opportunity to go beyond that state of dualities, I think that is also not a yes or no, it's not a binary state. So we have to actually do a lot of endeavors and efforts just to get there, because I guess for all practices, but definitely in the practice of yoga, I think also in the practice of music, there are prerequisites. So if you just sit down with an instrument and you have no skill, you have no information, you have no learning, then you're not going to be able to get to a state of musicality. It doesn't matter how good you are at it or how bad you are at it, but you still need to have some background knowledge of what you're proceeding with. So similarly, the practice of yoga also has a lot of prerequisites, and all of us with all good intentions, we start with those prerequisites, but I think most of us or many of us just get stuck there with the prereqs themselves, and we are not able to make the switch. So I think that is where the disconnect comes. And even I right now, a lot of the time is spent in really getting prepared for the practice. The preparatories take away a lot of time. And over a period of time, that is what one hopes, that it's like pretty much, like you can go to bed and you go to sleep quickly rather than having to light aromatherapy candles and doing oil massage and counting sheep and all that. So you just hope that the stage of practice becomes a little easier to access.
So those prerequisites you're talking about, and just to be clear for the listeners, you're speaking about the asana practice and some of those prereqs, kind of, would you call that the foundation for the transition that you're making to the more, to the other limbs, which is there one in particular you're thinking about, or just the more internal practices?
In the only practice that I really know very well is this methodology that I have chosen to follow, that has been taught to me. And in that methodology, yes, the asanas are the foundation, but I don't think that means that in all parts of yoga that needs to be the foundation. For me, just starting with the body seems to be the easiest way for me to start that process of transition.
Mm-hmm. So those preparatory aspects are just preparing, and as you know, and using the body as kind of as this gateway
Yes.
to a deeper understanding or deeper connection. But as we get older, our body changes, right? So then
Yes.
I don't know about you, but it takes even longer to kind of get to that state physically than I used to when I was, 20. How do you make that transition if the body is taking more time to prepare?
It is like you said yourself, it is an internal process. So I think it is what is more important, that one has learned the discipline of starting with the body and going through some paces to put the body in a state where it is stable, where it requires, where some effort has been spent, and where there is some alertness that has to be maintained. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it necessarily means that one has to be in a very complex asana position. That I think maybe is a factor of just good karma, if you can be in a very complex position and still be focusing on other things. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that is the point. It is definitely, it's again to strive towards those more complex asanas. It is again, I think it's a part of the preparatories where it's like an endeavor, it's a project, or maybe it's like a hobby, and there is nothing wrong with that. But I don't think we call an endeavor or a hobby as a practice.
Mm-hmm. So if you're making that transition, what does your practice look like now? If it was mostly asana, now what does it
I think from
entail?
The outside, it still looks, I'm still doing whatever I'm doing internally, still in an asanic position. Mm-hmm. But I'm not so much focusing on correcting my physical postures anymore. I'm working more, trying to observe more and working more on the breath, and going, I think, towards a state of meditation now, since I have had a meditation practice in the past, which I kind of abandoned halfway through. And I'm trying to see if I can get back towards it. I'm also, I find myself these days also gravitating more towards more worshipful practices. Mm-hmm. Where so I also had this, went through very ambivalent phase of being agnostic. And I think when I grew up, I was never really a theist, but it was just fun to participate in all in our country, at least. There are mm-hmm. all religious festivals and functions are there, like social community occasions. So they're just a lot of fun to participate in. I don't think I ever thought about it. But then after I grew up, I went through this phase of being sort of agnostic. And I find myself now coming back to a more worshipful state mentally. And I find that that helps, or rather it has integrated into my practice, or maybe my practice has integrated into that.
Do you have an example in your life off the mat where the practice has really come to help you or not help you?
I don't know if I can give you a specific example, Jen, but I think it has completely transformed me from the person that I used to be. I've been practicing now I've been learning asanas now close to 20 years. And the person that I used to be, there's a very vast difference in how I think and how I act. And of course, some of it is also the fact that as one ages, one changes in any case. But I think my life has taken a very different trajectory. If I did not have this practice, I would not have gone this way. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. My parents are perpetually complaining about my promising corporate career, which I gave up. But it has gone on a completely different tangent. And as each curve that I've taken, or each turn that I've taken, it's just gone farther and farther away from the person that I could have been or might have been.
Mm-hmm. Is that, you mentioned your parents wanting you to have taken a more corporate career trail, but is there also not just the external, but is there an internal change you feel like you've actually changed who you are or what you value?
Value is a very interesting question. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, the last few years. Yeah, it is. I have, it's even as a progression of just doing yoga, it has been an interesting transition because especially in our tradition, and you know this very well, there is a stress on determination and about rigor, etc. And that sort of spills out into our lives as well, and the way we do things, right? And
Yeah.
things like values also become a little rigid. There's a sort of rigidity that creeps into everything. And over the last few years, the last 2-3 years, I've just found myself questioning some of these things. And of course, this has happened as a progression within the path of yoga, but I don't think I would have questioned these things also if I had not seen them in such extremes.
Do you have an example of that? Like, do you have an example of something that's rigid?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we all have, I mean, most of us have a sense of a value system, and those of us who think that we are people who uphold our values, there is a certain sense of self-righteousness about it, about taking the moral high ground. And some of the things that I've started questioning recently is that sense of rigidity that we attach to our own values, are we sometimes hiding behind it and sort of not questioning things that we are ascribing to a value system? Because I don't think a value exists in isolation, and if it is not conforming to what you feel in your heart and what you feel in your guts and what you determine through your buddhi or your intelligence, and if you are taking a certain action because you think that it is based on some value system, I think there is a disconnect somewhere. It's I think something has been left unexamined, and that is fine. Sometimes we just don't have the wherewithal to examine ourselves so closely, but it is worth examining. And I've seen this especially in the last few years, because there have been so many issues in the society, within our communities, where people have taken sides, and there has been this sense of moral high ground about, I'm on the side of the right, and therefore you must be on the side of the wrong. And yeah, it just, I think over the last 2-3 years, I have become a lot more questioning about what is it that, when I say that I value something, what is it, how did I reach that conclusion? And is there a sense of compatibility in how logically I arrive at that conclusion? What is my instinct telling me? What is my heart telling me? Or is it just something that I'm rigidly trying to follow?
That's very interesting. And I'm wondering if that questioning or that reevaluating values makes it easier to hear others and others people's perspectives. Have you found that you've been able to open up to that?
I have, yes. And I have recognized or acknowledged mistakes that I have made in the past about, once again saying that this is just, it is not right, and therefore you are not right. I think it's really important that we take position against causes, or for causes, but many of the times, or I don't know about many of the times, this is certainly something that I have done, so maybe other people have done it as well. But I think sometimes we, when we do that, and we forget that there are people who are against whom we are passing judgments, and that is not very easy to do. Sometimes, for example, it's very easy, it's like a black and white case, but most often the things that happen around us, it is not. For example, I would maybe 10 years ago, there was a brief period of time in the various things that I've done in my life, that we were in the environmental consulting business, sustainability business, and we would make a big show about always traveling on trains and never taking flights, and being very disdainful about people who did those things and drove big cars, etc. So now I go back and question, yes, it's a really good cause, and we must, of course, all of us should take care of the environment, but we don't really have right to pass judgment on individual people and individual cases. I think it requires a lot more compassionate handling.
Has your practice, specifically what you do on your mat or even off your mat, that has helped you be able to see the gray?
Yes, I think it has thrown me into a lot of confusion suddenly, certainly, which is, I think that's very good. It's better than being in the black or the white. I don't think I have resolved everything that has come up, but yes, it has definitely thrown up a lot of questions, and it has translated also in my practice changing, becoming more open and accepting of other kinds of practices.
Let's talk about your teaching. Tell us how long you've been teaching, and then what is your purpose or your mission or your what it means for you to teach.
Okay, so first of all, I have a problem with the word teaching itself. No, I have known some very good teacher. It's just that with no false sense of modesty, but I don't know if the term really applies to me. So the term guru is completely, it's like out of the window. I don't even know what it means. But I have a problem attaching even the word teacher to myself. Okay. I think if you want me to put a word to it, to what maybe I do, it is, I would say, maybe I'm like a starter.
Okay.
Starter to a sourdough bread.
I love that.
It's more like that. That's all I do. I think that's all I can claim to have done, or done with some modicum of success. And it's not consistent, just like the starter is not consistent. It is very it's a very homegrown process. And sometimes the bread doesn't rise too well, and sometimes the starter is very weak, and the starter needs to be made active. So that's how it goes. I go through phases, and the people that are around, they take, I think, whatever. So one takes whatever one has to take. I don't think I do anything more than that. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I love that. What is the word? What is it about the word teacher that doesn't feel right to you?
Because I have absolutely no idea beyond the most superficial about whether what I am trying to communicate is what people are receiving. Of course, I can tell that their arms are straight or bent, or their legs are straight and bent. So I do not, if there is any teaching that is happening, I think people are teaching themselves. They are interpreting whatever they are hearing in their own minds. And if they are learning it, then they are learning. So yes, that is what I have. Talking about myself, there are things that I have learned in life myself, and things that have been taught to me. Those, most of those have been life experience. They have not really been, person to person transmissions.
So does that mean because you do offer classes, do you feel like you're providing that experience to someone to have a learning from the experience versus teaching a particular technique or concept or idea?
See, once again, I think over the last few years, the way that I instruct has also been undergoing training, and it's I can't say that I have figured it out, but this is how I feel right now at this point. There was a point when I felt that, Trikonasana has to be done a certain way, and then that it is my responsibility to tell them exactly how to do it. I do not feel that so much these days. I think So yes, there was a time then I think all of us who, when you once first starts teaching, there is not much mind space to, explore and be adventurous and be creative. But maybe everybody goes through, so maybe it's not something that is unique to me. Maybe everybody comes to this phase eventually. But right now, even when I try to instruct absolute beginners, I cannot go back anymore to that method of telling them do only this and everything else is wrong. I think it is much more interesting for me to try to communicate what are the various ways in which a Trikonasana can be approached, and what are the various effects therefore that it can have, and how do you experiment with the various forms of it. So yes, so I end up quite often not getting to the final positions and just skirting around it a lot.
What's your experience of what the students are learning, and or what are their comments since your teaching has evolved?
We are a very community place, so people from all, it's a very diverse group of people who come to us to learn. And there are always people who are very highly motivated to learn asanas, and there are people come with various motivations, of course. But I think just this very fact that the phase that we have been going through this last 3 months, this because of coronavirus and COVID-19, the fact that so many of them have been able to maintain their practice, I think is a good testimony that there is something that has appealed to them, and there is something that they're able to carry forward without this constant or very direct supervision, because they are pretty much, I mean, I'm surprised and I'm in complete admiration myself. I don't think after being a student for just 3, 4, 6 months, even a year or a couple of years, I would have been able to sustain my learning in this online format where the responsibility is all on me for such an extended period of time.
Yeah, so it sounds like you talked about it being a starter, and a starter is you give it to someone else and then they start their own sourdough bread. So it does sound like in this way, the students are really, getting in there with their own bread versus coming to be fed constantly instruction and direction and correction.
Yeah, and this has actually been such, I mean, there are so many unfortunate things about this situation, but this has been a really good opportunity, I think, at least for all these students in our community to really take that responsibility on. I mean, we have since the last 5 years kept harping on it ad infinitum that one needs to develop a self-practice and needs to get more independent, and it has not really worked. There are very few people who lot of people who are extremely regular to classes, but very few people who have had a self-directed practice. But this last 3 months has done it. So I think sometimes the situation itself forces one to evaluate and take on responsibilities which maybe one did not think that one was capable of. But I think also in that case, I am very glad that they had the wherewithal and they felt confident enough to go ahead. So because it also doesn't just come out of the blue suddenly.
Let's talk about community, because you mentioned how you've created a real community place with people with diverse backgrounds. How have you done that, and what does that mean to have a community or be part of a community?
Okay, no, I have not done it. I am a very shy and retiring and a very introverted person. So being in any kind of position of visibility is really not my cup of tea at all. I think it's the process of starting things off, and sometimes it just rises and sometimes it goes very flat, and then it starts to rise again. And I can't claim that I have had a large role to play in it. It is not something, it is definitely not a role that I want to take on, Jen. It is, I think, to be, and I have had setbacks the last few years as well. I think one needs to be in a very wise person to take on that responsibility of being a leader in a community, or a position that is visible and where people look up to you, because it's a very fragile place, and it is very easy to make mistakes. So it is, therefore, it is not a responsibility that I look forward to. And it is us being a community, it started way back, maybe not way back, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we had just started. And Mohan is my husband, and he is also, he teaches along with me at the practice room. So Mohan and I were deciding how to sort of acknowledge some event. I don't know what it was. It must be one of those Hanuman Jayanti, Patanjali Jayanti, maybe Guruji's birthday. And we wanted to just do a asana related thing, but we thought it would be nice to get some food. And you didn't know us in New York, right? But we have had this food and feeding people fetish since forever. It's just that, no, food brings people together. So,
I mean, have you found yourself in this leadership position and you're like, whoa, I don't want to be here? Or, I mean, certainly people
I have, yes,
look up to you. I mean,
yes, so it's very true, Jen. You know what I told you, I have always been a very introverted person, and it has made me very uncomfortable. I mean, it's funny now that we are doing all these online classes and I have to be in front of the camera every day, and I have to post pictures of myself on Instagram. So I've got over some very big mind blocks. So in one way it is probably good, but still it is it has made me very uncomfortable to realize that I'm being talked about, and I would say something and I would move on, and then, you know, weeks later somebody else would bring it up and say that Jaya said this in class, and then you realize that you have to be a lot more careful about what you're saying and how it is being interpreted.
what is the culture of yoga where you are in India or in Bangalore? I'm curious, as we're speaking to each other across continents, across time zones, this subject of yoga that unites us, but and maybe having been in New York, you can shed light on some of the differences or the similarities, or maybe just tell us a little bit about what's the culture like there, what's going on around this topic.
See, I have always been in big cities, so my perspective on it is not really pan-India. It is very cosmopolitan, and in one way it is quite close to the Western concept of yoga. I think maybe the only...
Which is, can you talk about, when you say the Western concept, what's the other concept, or how are you distinguishing those two?
For example, in our tradition of it being primarily an asana based practice. There are, of course, India is supposed to be, you know, this seat of spirituality, but in my upbringing, and I think in a large part of people whose upbringing has been in cities, it has very unfortunately, it was not really part of our education. And I think that's a real, I wish there was some way of integrating it into the education system as we were growing up. Very recently, you know, so a niece of mine who's now, she lives in Australia, and she was telling me that when she was very young, and she was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and in their school, they were trying to get them to recite the Vedas. And she was saying that about how she absolutely hated it. And she was saying that it made no sense to her, and therefore she hated it. And I'm trying to, by myself, I'm trying to learn some chanting. And the methodology of learning Vedas is this, that it is taught to very young children because their memory is so much sharper than adults, but their ability to intellectually understand all of those dense concepts, that is not really developed. So Vedas are really, that's how they are taught. They are taught once at a very young age when one doesn't really understand what it means. So pretty much learned by rote, but then that memory is really sits very deep inside your brain and you don't forget it. And then once you've gone through that cycle, you grow up, and then when your brain is a little more matured, you go over that whole process once again, where you really understand what it really means. So but then we have all had this very Western system of education. So even those of us whose parents, maybe they tried to impose some kind of Eastern knowledge on them, probably they also rebelled. But in any case, my parents did not. They didn't have access to it. So all of us grew up with this very Western system of rationality and thinking, and not much knowledge really of what our own tradition and offered us. And now when I listen to Prashantji, of course, it took me a long time to really start making sense of what he was saying. But then I feel it even more so that I wish some of these concepts had been introduced to us as part of our education system, but they were not. And I think he's doing a wonderful job really of bridging that gap, where one doesn't feel like it is very archaic and it's something that is being forced down your throat. It still feels very contemporary. Even our westernized rational minds can accept it, but it brings to us things that we otherwise would not have touched, because now it just feels too difficult. Who's going to get into those Sanskrit texts and try to understand what they meant? So yes, so that's how we are. Most of us city folks have not really had much of a interaction with the traditional form of yoga or Ayurveda or any other form of spirituality. So for us also, those who have taken to it, it's been an adult pursuit. And as an adult pursuit, of course, one has gone into it for various reasons, but that's how it is even in the West. Some people go into it because there's just that, they want to, life gets so traumatic that you're looking for a spiritual outlet, or you are attracted to an asana practice, or you're attracted to an pranayama practice, and then you just pick up. For most of us practitioners, even in India, the trajectory has been very similar.
And do you feel like that's a responsibility of yours to impart when you are, I'm not going to use the word teaching, when you're passing on the starter of your sourdough bread?
Yes, it is. It's very difficult though, Jen, because we have, it's a lot of information for me to understand, to integrate, to assimilate, and then to figure out how to transmit it in a form which is palatable by people. It's definitely, I mean, when I was talking to you about how it doesn't make so much sense to me these days to just, instruct on how a Trikonasana is to be done. One of the aspects is that there are, that little thing is part of a much larger whole, and that much larger whole is actually, it's very rich and it's very interesting. And it's the only thing that will lead us towards the practice. The little part, the Trikonasana leading us to the practice is very difficult. We will probably just get stuck at the Trikonasana.
When you say to the practice, what do you mean exactly?
The practice of it being a practice that, that it's supposed to be an Ashtangic practice. I mean, all of us have read that Yoga Sutra of Patanjali in some form or another, and rationally we have understood it, but how to really convert it into a method which is practical is I mean, that is the practice, but it is not very easy to actualize. So once again, we sort of get stuck on the prerequisites. The prerequisites are very important, but then one has to figure out a way of going beyond the prerequisites as well.
Well, I want to thank you so much. Is there anything you want to tell us what you're up to? You're doing online classes through the practice room. Anything else happening right now? I know it's pretty difficult to plan with coronavirus looming ahead looming over our heads.
Yeah. Yes, it is pretty difficult to plan. So, but Mohan and I have always, and this is how he was, and this is how I was not. I was always a very safe person, but he was always somebody who would rush, headlong into things, and he would pick on anything, and he'd say, "We can do it."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, apart from maybe being a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist. So we have really been enjoying these last few months of figuring out a new, very different way of communicating, and the technology that is involved. And I think if I said earlier that I felt like I was a starter, I think now I feel like I write instruction manuals. I am actually a connoisseur of instruction manuals. I really love them. And I really appreciate a well-written instruction manual. So I think the online teaching is a little bit like that. It is, we have been enjoying this new phase as well.
Well, I'm enjoying your, for those listeners who are out there, Practice Room is on Instagram, and you guys are posting some great instructional videos and also information for your students. So I will put all that information in the show notes so for those who are listening can check you out.
Yeah, please do.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and this has been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Jen, and I look forward to seeing you here very soon.
Oh, I hope.
So that's it for this week's episode. I wish you a happy and healthy week. Stay tuned for more episodes in this series. And please, please don't forget to leave a review. I can be found at www.jenkagan.net. And for any information on our wonderful guests, please refer to the show notes.